The skyline of Miami glitters against the Atlantic. A wall of glass and steel rises straight out of turquoise water, home to more than 6 million people and hundreds of billions of dollars in real estate. It looks permanent. It looks inevitable. But a little over a century ago, if you had stood on this exact spot, you would have been standing in water up to your chest, surrounded by a tangle of mangrove roots, clouds of mosquitoes, and a flooded wilderness stretching 100 miles in every direction. This was not land. It was a drowning shelf of porous limestone sitting just beneath a slow, silent river of grass. And that raises a question that should have been impossible to answer. How do you engineer a multi-billion-dollar paradise out of a swamp that refuses to stay dry? The story does not begin with a building. It begins with an audit of the water itself. In the early 1900s, surveyors fanned out across the southern third of Florida and confirmed what the maps had only hinted at. The Everglades were not a lake and not a marsh. They were a moving sheet of fresh water, 50 miles wide and only inches deep, draining a third of an inch per mile from Lake Okeechobee all the way to the sea. There was almost no dry ground anywhere. Into this reality stepped Governor Napoleon Bonaparte Broward, a former steamboat captain with a politician's certainty and almost no ecological understanding. He campaigned on a single audacious promise. He would drain that abominable, pestilence-ridden swamp and hand it to the people as the richest farmland in America. The engineers who studied the problem reached a brutal conclusion. You could not build on this water. You could not pile it up, pump it into the ground, or wait it out. The limestone beneath their feet was saturated, and the water table sat at the surface. There was only one option. They had to physically remove the water, all of it, by carving artificial rivers straight to the ocean and letting gravity pull the Everglades out to sea. To do that, they would have to cut through solid bedrock with nothing but steam, steel, and willpower. This was the era of the drainage machine. Enormous floating dredge boats, some of them weighing hundreds of tons, were assembled on site and set loose against the rock. These were not delicate instruments. They were industrial monsters with rotating cutter heads and dipper buckets that bit into the oolitic limestone, chewing through stone that had taken the ocean tens of thousands of years to lay down. Coal-fired boilers screamed day and night. The dredges dug the channel beneath themselves, floated forward into the water they had just released, and dug again, inching across the wilderness a few feet at a time. Over the years, these machines moved millions upon millions of cubic yards of earth and rock, a feat of raw excavation that rivaled the canals being cut at Panama in the very same decade. The result was a network of artificial arteries slashed across the peninsula. The Miami Canal drove northwest from Biscayne Bay toward Lake Okeechobee. The New River Canal opened a second wound near Fort Lauderdale. And the St. Lucie Canal cut east toward the Atlantic, designed to bleed the swollen lake before it could overflow. Understand the physics of what they were attempting. Water does not want to leave the Everglades quickly. The land is almost perfectly flat. The gradient is measured in inches, and gravity barely cooperates. These canals were an attempt to force a continent's worth of slow-moving water to drain on a human schedule instead of a geological one. For a time, it appeared to work. Sections of ground emerged from the water, black and rich, and the marketing machine roared to life. Because the canals did not pay for themselves, the land did. Real estate promoters realized that, drained or not, this swamp could be sold today to buyers who would never see it until tomorrow. Henry Flagler had already pushed his railroad down the coast, and where the rails went, the speculators followed. The most notorious of them was Richard Bowles, who bought enormous tracts of undrained Everglades and sold them sight unseen to eager northerners. The brochures were masterpieces of engineering fiction. They showed crisp blueprints, surveyed lots, neat grids of streets and farms, tropical abundance waiting to be claimed. Thousands of buyers mailed in their savings for a piece of the new American frontier. Then they arrived. They stepped off the train, clutching deeds for land that was, in many cases, still 6 feet underwater. The promised farms were submerged. The surveyed lots existed only on paper, their corner stakes hidden somewhere beneath the muck. The drainage had been wildly oversold and badly under-engineered, and the water that was supposed to be gone was still there. Lawsuits followed, fraud investigations followed, and yet, slowly, the dredges kept cutting, the canals kept draining, and just enough land kept emerging to keep the dream barely alive. South Florida had been sold into existence before it physically existed, and now the engineering had to catch up to the marketing. But here is the part the brochures never mentioned, the part that is still true tonight. The water never surrendered. Every drop the canals carried away was replaced by rain, by the lake, by the relentless pressure of the sea pushing back through the porous rock. After catastrophic hurricanes and floods in the 1920s and 40s drowned thousands and nearly washed the whole experiment away, the federal government took over with a system so vast it makes Broward's canals look like a rehearsal. It is called the Central and Southern Florida Flood Control Project, and it is the single most important piece of infrastructure most Floridians have never heard of. It is a hidden war fought around the clock. Roughly 2,000 miles of canals and levees wrap the developed coast, holding the Everglades on one side and the ocean on the other. And at the choke points sit the pump stations, some of the most powerful in the world, with engines capable of moving billions of gallons a day. They run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, lifting water uphill against gravity, throwing it back into the swamp or out to the Atlantic, because the land itself sits too low to drain on its own. The moment those pumps stop, the water begins its slow, patient return. South Florida is not a place that was conquered. It is a place that is being actively, mechanically held back, every second of every day. The glittering skyline you started with only exists because somewhere out in the dark, a machine is still fighting the swamp that owns this land. If engineering on this scale fascinates you, subscribe to The Engineering Edge, and we will keep showing you the hidden systems that hold our world together.